Today I'm taking a look at a wine from a historic Australian property. This is Katnook Estate. It's their Founders Block Merlot, and this is the 2021 vintage of that. So evidently Katnook is an Aboriginal word, and I'm told it means fat land. In 1867, a Scot, John Riddoch, who's seen as sort of the father of Coonawarra's viticulture, comes to Penola, starts buying land to farm in and around Coonawarra, and he has a sheep station known as Riddoch's Run, and builds a woolshed. The 1867 woolshed is still there, it's part of the winery. But he's also been told that this is a good place to grow fruit trees, and as part of the fruit that he's growing, he plants 140 acres of vines. Now initially, Riddoch was just selling the fruit, he wasn't making wine, but in 1895 he made his first vintage of his own wine. This seems to have been successful because in 1896 he employed a professional winemaker, somebody called William Salter, to come and make the wine here. However, it appears that this didn't work in the long term. So for much of the next 70 years, this estate was primarily a sheep station. In 1967, the property was acquired by the Junghans family and became part of their Wingara wine group. The first vines for the new era of wine growing here were planted in 1971. And in 1980, winemaker Wayne Stephens made the first vintage at the resurrected winery. Stephens went on to work here for a further 37 years up until his death in 2017. During this period, the Wingara wine group was acquired by the international wine group Henkel Freixenet. And in 2020 was sold on to the Accolade Group, who still own it. The estate comprises 155 hectares of vineyards, and those are planted to Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Malbec, Tempranillo, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay and Riesling. The Founders Block range that this belongs to is named in honour of John Riddoch's original land holdings. Now, the growing season leading up to the 2021 vintage saw good rain in the winter that topped up the soil's water level. Temperatures throughout the season were warm, but there weren't particularly heat spikes. Generally it was quite dry, and so the steady temperatures and the minimal rain ensured there was very little disease pressure, and they were able to harvest healthy, ripe fruit. Harvesting took place between the 28th of March and the 12th of April. I have no notes to say whether this is hand-picked or machine-picked, but I would assume at its price range from Coonawarra, this fruit is likely to have been machine-picked. I've got virtually no notes about how this wine was made, but the one thing they do emphasise is the fact that this is quite lightly oaked. So this wine ages in a combination of old French and American oak barrels. So also the American oak is likely to be hogshead, so slightly larger, 250 litre barrels, and it does this for an average of 2 months. So the oak influence will really be quite minimal. So what they're trying to do is to emphasise the fruit flavours and aromas in the final wine. They describe this as a modern style wine for everyday enjoyment. They do, however, suggest that it should age for up to 5 years. So let's have a look at it and see what we think, shall we? My first impression is actually of a wine that has pretty good depth of colour. It's quite a dark, vibrant black ruby with a relatively purple rim. I can just about see through it. It's not quite opaque, but very nearly. The wine has 13.5% alcohol, and that's not particularly high for Merlot. So I'm assuming that this has been picked at a level where there's reasonable fruit ripeness, but they're looking to retain some of the acidity, some of the freshness in the final wine. Swirling it, it is quite readily forming tears on the side of the glass there, so relatively viscous. The aromas are just a little closed actually. There's a dark plum note, certainly very obvious there, but it's almost as if there is a slight amount of cedariness, maybe a little bit of earthiness over the top there. But sitting behind that, there is this sort of juicy, dark, plummy fruit. So that's for taste. On the palate, the wine is dry, fruit is crisp and crunchy. It's almost a slightly leafy note to it, and yet there's a rounded, rich, lush, black fruit note. It's a black cherry. It's a dark, but still fresh plum, that sort of damson sort of freshness. There's a slight bitter bite to the wine, and it's followed up by that sort of lovely freshness. There's almost an edge to this wine that you could almost say it was a Tempranillo. And although that may seem quite obvious in that the wine's a Merlot, I think the fact that a wine from Coonawarra is able to give something of the idea of the freshness of Merlot from Tempranillo makes it really quite attractive. The wine may not be particularly complex. It simply has that sort of rounded, lush, smooth, glycerol sort of noted fruit. But the flavours are lasting really quite well. I think it's a nicely handled wine. It has reasonable balance. It's not particularly structured. I think it's an easy drinking wine that would go with lighter foods. You'd quite happily drink that with a pizza or something like that. It's a red wine that could be drunk on its own. There isn't a drying, spicy note of oak tannins taking over the mid-palate. The alcohol seems fairly well balanced, and that's allowing the finish to have some quite good length. I should imagine the intensity of fruit and the good acidity would allow it to age for 4 or 5 years quite happily, but there's no need to wait for it to soften. It's open and approachable now. I guess if you're looking at quality, then quality is relative to its price. I'll leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so that you can find out if it's available near you and at what price. And do also use that page to find out more about the wine if you want to. There are tabs there that can allow you to compare the different vintages. You can look at the critics' notes, you can see what other users have to say, any awards it's won, you can see its price history, you can see any notes we have about the winemaking, the producer, the grape variety and the region. So there's plenty of information there to help you make an informed purchasing decision if you're thinking of buying this wine. Certainly I think it's an attractive, lively wine that provides some decent quality in an easy drinking style. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. We'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to follow our channel, do please subscribe. We would really appreciate your support there. If you have any comments, please pop those in the comments box below. It would be fantastic to know what you think about the wines we're looking at, tastings we're doing, or anything else that you think is relevant in that situation. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to share it with them. We'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. So once again, thank you for joining us, and I do hope you'll be able to take some time, come and join us for another tasting in the very near future, won't you? Till then, bye for now.